Daniel woke with a heavy feeling in his chest. His small room on the ship felt different this morning, though nothing had changed in its design. The walls still glowed with soft blue light. The bed still hummed faintly with the warmth of the ship's systems, and the screen still showed the endless trees of an earth forest swaying in the wind. Yet he knew the world outside his door was not the same anymore. When he stepped into the corridor, he immediately noticed the stares. They were not hostile, not even unfriendly, but they were not the usual casual glances of coworkers either. The aliens he passed moved slightly to the side to give him more space, their heads tilted downward in small, respectful nods. One even lifted a hand in a formal greeting he had only ever seen during ceremonies. Daniel forced a smile, nodding, back awkwardly, but inside he felt a knot forming in his stomach. The truth of it pressed on him. His words from yesterday had been taken as a declaration. The nurse had believed him. The others now believed him too. In their eyes, he was no longer a simple technician from a distant planet. He was something else, something far more complicated. By the time he reached the cafeteria, Daniel was already exhausted from the attention. He grabbed a tray of food, something that looked like soft bread but tasted faintly of fruit, and sat at an empty table in the corner. Usually this was where he could eat quietly and blend into the background. But not today. Two young alien attendants approached him carrying their own trays. They sat opposite him, smiling politely. Daniel gave them a nervous nod. "Morning," he said. One of them spoke, her voice soft but formal. "Consort, it is an honor to share a meal with you." Daniel almost choked on his bread. He waved his hand quickly. No, I'm not. Consort, I mean. I think you've misunderstood. I'm just a technician. I fix machines, that's all." The two attendants exchanged a look, their large eyes blinking slowly. To them, his denial seemed not like rejection, but humility. The second one smiled. "Your modesty is noble. The bond strengthens the queen already." Daniel groaned inwardly. This was impossible. The more he tried to correct them, the more they twisted his words into some cultural virtue. He forced a small laugh and decided to change the subject. "So, how's the food today?" They eagerly explained the nutritional value of the meal, clearly happy to sit with him. Daniel nodded along, barely tasting what he ate. His thoughts circled around one truth. This was getting worse by the hour. Later, as he returned to the medical wing, he noticed more signs of change. His work badge no longer opened the technician's entrance. Instead, the guards at the main chamber bowed and allowed him to pass without scanning it. Inside, his small workstation near the machines had been moved closer to the Queen's platform, as if he was now meant to remain near her. The silver-blue nurse was waiting for him, her calm face glowing faintly in the chamber's light. "Husband?" she said warmly. "The Queen rests, but she feels your presence." Daniel rubbed his forehead. "Listen, about that. I think there's been a big misunderstanding. On my world, when I said those words, it was just a joke. I wasn't making a promise, I wasn't—" The nurse tilted her head, watching him silently. Daniel stumbled on his explanation, feeling foolish. "It's just, humans sometimes say things we don't mean literally. We use words to make each other laugh or to make things feel less heavy." She listened without interrupting. When he finally stopped, she said softly, "You speak of jest? We do not know this way, but perhaps it is your nature. Perhaps this is why the Queen chose you, to bring lightness even in darkness." Daniel's mouth opened, then closed. How could he argue with that? He sighed, shoulders slumping. "I didn't mean to cause all this trouble." Her smile deepened. "You cause no trouble. You bring honor." And with that, she guided him to stand beside the Queen once more. The Ice Queen remained unconscious, her body still healing. Yet somehow Daniel felt the weight of her presence. He stood awkwardly at her side, unsure what he was supposed to do. The nurse gestured gently. "Speak to her. She will hear." Daniel hesitated. "What should I say?" "Anything. the nurse replied. Your voice carries strength. Daniel looked down at the Queen. Her features were serene, her chest rising and falling with steady breaths. He cleared his throat. Hello, Your Majesty. I'm Daniel. I don't know if you can hear me, but I hope you're healing well. The machines are working fine now, so you don't have to worry. Everything's under control. He felt ridiculous talking to someone who could not answer. Yet the nurse nodded approvingly as though his words were important. Daniel scratched the back of his neck, then added softly, I guess I'll be around for a while, so get better soon, okay? The nurse smiled again, as if she had just witnessed something profound. Daniel sighed, realizing that every casual word he spoke only seemed to deepen the misunderstanding. Over the next few days, the changes grew more obvious. His quarters were moved to a larger room near the royal wing. Meals were delivered to him with care, each dish selected as though he were someone special. Aliens he barely knew offered him assistance, addressing him with formal titles. When he walked through the corridors, whispers followed him. At first, Daniel tried to correct them, but he soon gave up. Every attempt made things worse. If he said, I'm not her husband, they would respond with, Your devotion is clear. You wish only to protect her privacy. If he said, This is a mistake, they would reply, Such humility is rare. He could not win. One evening, as he sat in his new quarters, the nurse visited him. She carried a tray of tea-like liquid that steamed gently in the cool air. She set it on the table and sat across from him. You look troubled, she said calmly. Daniel leaned back, running a hand through his hair. Troubled? That's one way to put it. Everyone thinks I'm married to your queen because of one stupid joke. Back on Earth, people would laugh it off. Here, it's like I've been given a crown I never asked for. The nurse's gaze was steady. Perhaps it is not laughter, but destiny. He laughed weakly. Destiny? I'm just a guy who fixes wires and panels. I don't belong in your ceremonies or your politics. I'm not even sure I belong here on the ship sometimes. She studied him for a moment, then said softly, You see yourself as small, but the Queen chose you. That cannot be small. Daniel wanted to argue again, but the sincerity in her voice made him pause. He sighed, taking a sip of the tea. It was sweet, calming. On my world, he said quietly, marriage means something very serious. It means a promise for life. It's not something we say by accident. That's why this feels so wrong. I didn't mean it. The nurse nodded slowly, as if considering his words. Perhaps our meanings are different, but meaning is not always in words. Sometimes meaning is in action, and your actions already show care. You repair what is broken. You speak with kindness. You remain by her side. Daniel stared into the cup, unsure how to respond. He felt trapped between two worlds, misunderstood by one, unable to explain from the other. The nurse stood gracefully, bowing her head slightly. Rest, husband. Tomorrow you will sit with her again. She grows stronger with you near. As she left, Daniel leaned back in his chair, groaning softly. How had a simple joke spiraled into this? He thought of Earth, of the ease of speaking, freely, of laughter that did not carry such heavy weight. He missed it, and yet a small part of him wondered if maybe, just maybe, there was something more here. Daniel had never imagined that working as a medical technician on an alien hospital ship would feel so ordinary after a while. The ship itself was enormous, stretching longer than most cities on Earth, but inside the walls were quiet, soft, with a glow that reminded him of calm twilight. He had grown used to the humming sound of the machines, the strange scents of alien herbs, and the tall, graceful beings who worked beside him every day. For him, this was no longer strange. It was simply life. The queen of the alien race had been injured recently in a political incident. Nobody gave Daniel the full story since humans were still relatively new to this interstellar alliance, but he knew enough. The queen was important, powerful, and fragile after what had happened. She was kept under heavy care with nurses and healers watching over her day and night. Daniel's role was simple. He was not a doctor, but a technician, someone who repaired the machines that monitored her life functions and kept the healing chambers working smoothly. Still, because he worked so close to the Queen's room, he sometimes found himself drawn into tasks beyond just fixing equipment. On one such evening, Daniel was called to adjust a regulator near the Queen's chamber. The nurse who requested his help stood tall, almost 2 heads higher than him, her skin a soft silver blue that shimmered faintly in the light. She wore the formal healer's robe, and her movements were calm, precise, almost musical in rhythm. Daniel always found her intimidating, though she had never been unkind. "You must correct the flow here," she said, pointing to a panel with glowing runes. Daniel nodded, pulling out his tools. He crouched down, hands working quickly, and the familiar comfort of wires, connections, and calibration surrounded him. Machines made sense. Unlike alien traditions, unlike their politics, unlike the way they always seemed to take his words with such literal seriousness, machines were safe, predictable. The nurse watched him silently as he worked, her large eyes unblinking. Daniel could feel her gaze, and after a few minutes of silence, he felt the need to break it. Humor was his natural shield. On Earth, when things felt too heavy, he had always joked. Even when his colleagues did not laugh, the jokes helped him breathe easier. "Don't worry, baby," he said lightly, tightening a connector and giving the panel a tap. "I've got this under control." It was meant as nothing. Just a phrase. He did not even think about it. On Earth, he often said silly things like that to machines, to coworkers, even to strangers when trying to be funny. But here, his words did not fall into the air and vanish. The nurse's head tilted slightly. Her expression shifted, just a flicker, but her lips curved upward into what he recognized as her version of a smile. "Yes, husband," she replied gently. Daniel froze. He blinked at her, his wrench slipping slightly in his hand. "Wait. What?" Her eyes gleamed with calm certainty. "It is accepted. You have spoken the binding phrase. The bond is recorded. You are her chosen." He stared at her, completely lost. "Her chosen? What do you mean? I was just—" But before he could explain, the machine panel beeped softly, signaling that the adjustment was complete. The nurse gave a graceful nod of approval. "You have done well, husband." Daniel opened his mouth, then closed it. He wanted to protest, to laugh, to explain that baby was just a silly word and that yes did not mean a marriage vow. But the nurse had already turned, her long robe flowing behind her as she walked back toward the Queen's chamber. He stood there, stunned, tool still in his hand. "What just happened?" he muttered to himself. The rest of the shift felt like a blur. Daniel finished his work, double-checked the readings, and avoided speaking to anyone else for fear of accidentally declaring himself the cousin of a warlord or the father of a starship. When his tasks were finally done, he retreated to his small quarters. His quarters were plain but comfortable, a narrow bed, a small desk, and a wall screen that could display Earth scenes. He often kept it showing a forest with tall green trees swaying in the wind. Tonight, he sat on the bed staring at those trees, trying to make sense of what the nurse had said. It had to be a mistake. Clearly, something in translation had gone wrong. Humans said things they did not mean all the time. Aliens, maybe not so much. He remembered how, during his first weeks on the ship, his attempts at casual slang had been met with confusion, sometimes even with alarm. These beings did not joke the way humans did. Every word seemed to carry weight, every phrase considered carefully. He had thought he was learning how to adjust, but now he realized just how fragile the bridge of understanding was. Sleep came slowly, filled with strange dreams. He saw himself dressed in golden robes, standing beside a tall, luminous queen whose face he could not see. The nurse stood beside them, smiling knowingly. Alien crowds cheered. He tried to explain it was all a joke, but his voice was lost in the roar. The next morning, Daniel walked through the corridors as usual, carrying his toolkit. At first, nothing seemed different, but then he noticed something odd. An alien orderly, passing him, lowered his head slightly, a gesture Daniel had seen before only when they addressed high-ranking officials. Daniel blinked, unsure if he had imagined it. A moment later, another nurse greeted him with a formal phrase that sounded far too respectful for a simple technician. He felt a prickle at the back of his neck. By the time he reached the Queen's chamber, the feeling had grown stronger. 2 guards at the entrance stood straighter as he approached. One of them inclined his head. Daniel hesitated, unsure if he should respond, but before he could do anything, the silver-blue nurse appeared. "Husband," she said with serene warmth. "You return." Daniel nearly dropped his toolkit. "Look, about yesterday." She lifted a hand, silencing him with a graceful gesture. "Your presence is requested." And with that, she led him into the chamber. The Queen lay resting on a raised platform, her body surrounded by faint streams of light that flowed from healing devices. She was taller than the nurse, her form more radiant, her features both alien and oddly beautiful. Her eyes were closed, her breathing slow and steady. Daniel had seen her only from a distance before. Now, being led so close felt overwhelming. He swallowed, shifting his weight nervously. The nurse guided him to stand beside her. "You have spoken," she said softly, "and the bond is honored. You are recognized now as consort." Daniel's heart thudded. Consort? That sounded far too official. He opened his mouth to protest again, but the nurse's expression was calm, unshakable. Words failed him. For the rest of the day, Daniel moved in a haze. Every alien he passed seemed to look at him differently, some with curiosity, some with respect. Nobody treated him as just a technician anymore. He wanted to tell them all it was a mistake, but the words stuck in his throat. How could he even begin to explain human humor, sarcasm, or the casual way people on Earth threw around words like baby or yes, without meaning anything by them? That night, lying awake in his quarters, Daniel realized one thing with certainty. A joke had gone far beyond a joke. He was caught in something much larger now, and there was no easy way out. Daniel woke with a start, the soft hum of the alien ship vibrating through the walls around him. For a moment he forgot where he was, expecting the ceiling of his small apartment on Earth. But instead, the ceiling shimmered faintly, a glowing blue pattern that resembled drifting clouds. Reality returned quickly, and with it, the weight of everything he had been carrying. He was not on Earth. He was not living an ordinary life. He was, by a twist of fate and misunderstanding, the consort of an alien queen. The thought still made him shake his head. How had it come this far? He had never planned for greatness, never imagined standing at the center of a royal court. And yet here he was, seen by many as a symbol of unity, and by others as a stranger who did not belong. He rose slowly, splashed water on his face from the glowing basin, and stared at his reflection. He looked tired, his dark hair messy, his eyes lined with uncertainty. "What are you doing here, Daniel?" he whispered to himself. The nurse entered then, as though she had sensed his thoughts. She carried her usual tray of tea and fruit, her movements graceful. She placed it on the table and regarded him with a small smile. "You are restless." "You could say that," Daniel muttered. He sat down heavily. "I keep waiting for someone to figure out that this is all a big mistake, that I don't belong here." She tilted her head, the soft light reflecting off her silver-blue skin. "Perhaps you still think belonging means being like us, but it does not. Belonging means being needed, and you are needed." Daniel exhaled. He didn't know how to answer, so he simply sipped the tea. Its taste was strange but comforting, like herbs mixed with honey. Days turned into weeks, and the whispers of doubt among the council began to fade. The small things Daniel did, listening, helping, suggesting ideas, had begun to spread like ripples. Workers smiled at him in the halls, children of attendants waved shyly, and even officials who once looked at him with suspicion now greeted him with nods of respect. But the true test of his place came when the Queen finally awoke. It happened one quiet morning. Daniel was in the garden chamber, tending to a small plant he had been caring for. The aliens had given it to him as a gift, saying humans liked green things. The leaves shimmered faintly under the artificial sun, and Daniel found peace in watering it, trimming it, and watching it grow. The nurse rushed in, her usually calm face lit with urgency. "She has stirred," she said breathlessly. Daniel's heart leapt. He followed her quickly through the winding corridors until they reached the Queen's chamber. The room was filled with soft golden light, the air heavy with a scent like blooming flowers. And there, upon the great bed surrounded by healing instruments, the Queen's eyes were open. She was still weak, her movement slow, but her gaze was clear. When she turned her head and saw Daniel, her lips curved into the faintest smile. "Human," she whispered, her voice soft but steady. Daniel froze, unsure of what to say. Hi," he said awkwardly. The nurse suppressed a laugh. The Queen's attendants bowed deeply, but Daniel only stood there fumbling for words. The Queen's eyes lingered on him. "You stayed." Yeah," Daniel said softly. "I couldn't exactly leave. And besides, someone had to water the plants." The room grew still. Then, to everyone's shock, the Queen let out a quiet laugh, a sound like the gentle chime of glass. Daniel felt his face flush, but he couldn't help smiling back. From that moment on, the Queen began to recover quickly. Each day she grew stronger, her voice firmer, her presence commanding once again. But even as her strength returned, her gaze often lingered on Daniel. She asked him questions about Earth, about its oceans, its skies, its music, and its stories. Daniel told her about campfires, about silly jokes, about the way people gathered together when storms knocked out power. She listened intently, as though these small, ordinary tales were treasures. Word spread quickly. The Queen had awakened, and she had accepted the human at her side. The doubts that remained among the council began to fade. If the Queen herself trusted him, who were they to question? Still, Daniel could not shake the unease within him. One evening, after telling the Queen a story about his grandmother's cooking, he found himself pacing the corridor outside her chamber. The nurse found him there, restless as ever. "You are troubled again," she observed. Daniel ran a hand through his hair. "What if she realizes it was all a misunderstanding? That I only said yes as a joke? What if she sees me for what I really am? Just some guy who stumbled into all this?" The nurse looked at him carefully. "Do you think she does not already know?" Daniel blinked. "What?" "She is Queen," the nurse said softly. "She sees truth where others see only surface. She has always known what you are, yet she chooses you still." The words struck him deeply. Could it really be that simple? That she knew and still wanted him there? The final confirmation came during the grand ceremony weeks later. The Queen, now fully recovered, called for a gathering of the entire court. The great hall was decorated in glowing banners of silver and gold, and beings from across the empire attended. It was a day to show unity, strength, and renewal. Daniel stood nervously beside the Queen as she addressed her people. Her voice rang clear, echoing through the hall. She spoke of healing, of growth, of the importance of bonds not built on power alone but on trust, kindness, and resilience. And then, to Daniel's shock, she turned to him. "This human," she said, her voice carrying weight and warmth, "was not chosen for his strength, nor for his lineage, nor for his command of armies. He was chosen because he stayed, because he cared, because he gave without asking, and in his giving reminded us of what it means to lead. He is my consort, not by mistake, but by truth." The hall erupted in a sound Daniel had never heard before, a deep, resonant harmony that vibrated through his chest. It was their way of cheering, a song of approval that filled the air like music. Daniel stood frozen, overwhelmed, his eyes stinging. He wanted to argue, to explain, to confess. But when he looked at the Queen, her gaze was steady, calm, and full of quiet certainty, and in that moment he realized the nurse had been right. The Queen already knew. She had always known. After the ceremony, Daniel found himself alone in the garden again. The stars beyond the glass ceiling glowed softly, and the small plant he had tended had grown taller, its leaves spreading wide. He touched its stem gently, a smile tugging at his lips. The nurse appeared once more as though she had been waiting. "It is done," she said softly. Daniel nodded slowly. "Yeah, I guess it is." "You are home now," she said. He looked around at the glowing walls, the alien stars, the plant that had grown under his care. He thought of Earth, of the life he had left behind, and then of the Queen's laugh, her gaze, her trust. For the first time, he did not feel like an outsider. He felt chosen, and with that thought, Daniel finally let go of the doubt he had carried since the beginning. He may never have intended for any of this to happen, but it had. And maybe, just maybe, it was exactly where he was meant to be. The ship hummed gently around him, carrying him into a future he had never imagined, but one he was no longer afraid to face. He whispered to himself, almost laughing at the memory of how it all began. "Yes, baby." And this time, he meant it. Daniel had been on the alien hospital ship for weeks now, yet each day felt more unreal than the last. What had begun as a joke had turned into something much larger. He was no longer just a technician who fixed machines. He was the Queen's consort, at least in the eyes of everyone around him. And no matter how many times he tried to explain that it was a misunderstanding, no one believed him. They saw humility instead of denial, wisdom instead of confusion. But soon Daniel began to notice a new change. Not everyone looked at him with admiration anymore. Some of the glances he received in the corridors were no longer warm or curious, but sharp, calculating, even suspicious. Whispers followed him everywhere, and though he could not understand every alien word, he felt the shift in tone. One afternoon, the silver-blue nurse confirmed his fears. She found him in his quarters, where he sat with his head in his hands, staring at the glowing wall screen that displayed a calm earth forest. "There is unrest," she said quietly as she entered. Daniel lifted his head. "Unrest? Some doubt the Queen's choice," she explained, her voice soft but firm. "They question how a human, small and fragile, can stand as her consort. They say the bond is weak." Daniel groaned. "Great. Just what I needed. First they treat me like some kind of saint, and now half of them think I'm a mistake." The nurse placed a tray of tea on the table and sat across from him. "This is not unusual. When bonds are new, they are tested. You must show them your worth." He gave a hollow laugh. "Show them? What do they expect me to do, lift a starship over my head? I can't fight. I can't command armies. I'm just me." She tilted her head, studying him. "Perhaps that is enough." Daniel rubbed his forehead. "It never feels like enough." The next day, he was summoned to a gathering in the great hall of the ship. It was the largest room he had ever seen, its ceiling arched high above with glowing lights that resembled constellations. Rows of alien officials filled the space, their robes shimmering with colors that shifted like water. At the center stood a raised platform where the Queen would normally sit, but she remained in recovery. Instead, Daniel was led to the front, his heart pounding in his chest. The murmurs grew louder as he appeared. He could feel the weight of hundreds of eyes on him. Some were filled with respect, others with doubt. One of the council members stepped forward. His voice was deep, echoing through the hall. "Human Daniel, you have been accepted as consort by the Queen's healer, but questions remain. How can one such as you stand beside our ruler? What strength do you offer?" Daniel's throat went dry. He wished he could vanish, wished he could return to the quiet life of repairing machines where nobody cared about his words, but now all he had was his voice. He swallowed hard and began. "I know what you're thinking. I'm not like you. I'm smaller. I don't have your strength or your long lifespans or your wisdom from centuries of tradition. I'm just a human from a world that only recently joined the stars." The hall was silent, every ear tuned to him. He forced himself to continue. But here's the thing. My people have survived not because we are the strongest, but because we adapt. We learn. We find solutions in places others don't look. We make mistakes, yes, but we keep going. We laugh when things are hard. We share what little we have, and we fix what is broken. He took a deep breath, his hands trembling slightly. I can't fight your battles, I can't rule your people. But I can do what I've always done. I can care, I can listen. I can work to make things better, even in small ways. Maybe that doesn't sound like much, but sometimes small things change everything. For a long moment, the hall remained silent. Then a ripple of murmurs passed through the crowd. Some nodded thoughtfully, others frowned, unconvinced. The council member spoke again. Words are light, but actions are stone. We will see your worth in what you do. Daniel exhaled shakily as the gathering ended. He returned to his quarters, feeling both relieved and anxious. He had spoken from the heart, but he knew it might not be enough. In the days that followed, Daniel found himself under constant observation. Everywhere he went, officials watched him closely as if waiting for proof of his value. At first he felt trapped, unsure of what to do. But then he remembered something his father once told him back on Earth. When you don't know what to do, just start helping with whatever's in front of you. So Daniel helped. When a medical device malfunctioned, he repaired it himself instead of calling for another technician. When a young alien attendant struggled to carry a heavy tray, he stepped in to help. When a group of workers argued over a broken water system, he suggested a simple solution, using his earthborn knack for improvisation. Each time, his actions were small, ordinary. But the aliens watched closely, and slowly their expressions began to change. They saw not a warrior, not a leader, but someone who made things better quietly, without asking for recognition. One evening, the nurse found him repairing a loose connector near the Queen's chamber. She watched him work in silence before speaking. You are proving them wrong. Daniel looked up, sweat on his forehead. I'm not trying to prove anything. I'm just doing what I can. She smiled softly. And that is enough. But the whispers of doubt had not completely vanished. Some still questioned his place. And so a final test was arranged. The council invited him to a ceremonial gathering where disputes between factions would be settled. Daniel was asked to attend, not as a technician, but as the Queen's consort. He felt sick with nerves, but he could not refuse. The hall was filled with leaders from across the empire, their voices sharp with tension as they argued over resources and borders. Daniel sat quietly at first, listening, his heart racing. The arguments grew louder, more heated, until finally, one of the leaders turned to him. You, human, he said sharply. What say you to this dispute? If you are truly her consort, your voice must guide us. Daniel froze. He had no knowledge of their politics, no authority to decide their fate. But he remembered what the nurse had told him. Sometimes meaning is not in words, but in action. He stood slowly. I don't know your laws or your history, but I do know this. When people fight, it's usually because they're afraid of losing something important. On Earth, when neighbors argued, the only way forward was to stop thinking about winning or losing and start thinking about sharing. Maybe instead of asking, who gets more, the question should be, how can we both have enough? The hall grew quiet. His words were simple, almost too simple, but they carried a different perspective. After a long pause, one of the leaders spoke. Strange words, yet perhaps true. Another nodded reluctantly. Balance instead of conquest. Perhaps this is wisdom. The tension in the room softened. The arguments eased into calmer discussion, and though Daniel felt like he had only spoken common sense, the aliens treated his words as profound guidance. When the gathering ended, the nurse found him again. You have done more than you realize, she said. Daniel shook his head, still overwhelmed. I just said what made sense to me. And that, she replied gently, is why you matter. That night, alone in his quarters, Daniel stared at the forest screen once more. He thought about how far he had come from the man who once cracked a silly joke to ease tension. Somehow that joke had led him here into a role he never imagined, teaching lessons he didn't even know he had. He still felt uncertain, still felt unworthy. But maybe, just maybe, the misunderstanding had turned into something real. And perhaps the Queen, even in her silence, had seen something in him that he was only beginning to see in himself. Daniel's days began to take on a strange rhythm. He would wake in his new quarters, larger and brighter than before, and walk through the corridors where whispers always followed him. He would eat meals that were brought specially to his table, meals chosen as if he were someone of great importance. And each day, he was guided to the Queen's chamber, where the silver-blue nurse would ask him to sit beside her and speak. At first, he had no idea what to say. He felt awkward, sitting near a ruler who lay silent, her body bathed in soft streams of light from the healing machines. But the nurse insisted his words mattered, that the Queen could hear, even if she could not yet respond. So Daniel talked. He told her about his life on Earth, about the messy streets of his hometown, about his younger sister who always teased him, about the way rain smelled after a long dry summer. He spoke of little things, things that felt safe to share. The nurse always listened, nodding with approval as though his stories carried some deep wisdom. Daniel could never understand why, but each day when he left, the alien seemed even more respectful toward him. One morning, when he entered the chamber, he found not just the nurse, but several others waiting. They stood in a half-circle, tall and graceful, their robes shimmering in pale light. Daniel froze in the doorway. The nurse gestured for him to approach. "Husband, the council wished to see you." "The council?" Daniel repeated nervously. Why?" One of the robed figures stepped forward. His voice was deep and formal. "We have heard of your bond. We wish to witness the one chosen by our Queen." Daniel swallowed hard. "Listen, about that bond." But before he could finish, the nurse raised her hand and silence fell over the room. She looked at him with calm certainty. "Speak, Daniel. Let them hear you." He felt his palms grow sweaty. What was he supposed to say? He was just a technician, not a leader, not a husband to anyone, let alone an alien queen. But all eyes were on him. He glanced at the unconscious Queen, then back at the council members. Hello," he began awkwardly. "I'm Daniel. I don't really know what to say, but I guess I can tell you what I've been telling her. On my world, people don't always speak in formal ways. Sometimes we just talk about our lives, about small things. And sometimes the small things are what matter most." The room was utterly silent. He shifted uncomfortably, but continued. "Like, I told her about the time I fixed a broken generator in the middle of a storm on Earth. It wasn't heroic or anything. Just me, soaked in rain, tightening bolts while thunder shook the sky. But in that moment, what mattered wasn't being important. It was just keeping the lights on for the people who needed it." He looked around, expecting confusion, or maybe laughter. But the council members remained still, their faces serious, their eyes locked on him. He swallowed again, finishing quietly. "That's who I am. I fix things. I'm not a ruler. I'm not special. But if something's broken, I try to make it work again, that's all." The silence stretched until finally one of the council members bowed deeply. "Such words," he said, "carry weight. To fix what is broken is to honor life itself." Another nodded. The Queen's choice was wise. Daniel's heart sank. Once again, his attempt to downplay himself had only made things worse. They weren't dismissing his words, they were exalting them. When the council left, the nurse approached him. Her smile was serene. "You spoke with honesty. They will remember this." Daniel rubbed his face with both hands. "That's exactly what I was afraid of." In the days that followed, the attention grew. He was invited to a ceremonial meal, where long tables were filled with glowing dishes that shifted colors in the light. High-ranking officials sat around him, asking polite but probing questions. "What do humans value most?" one asked. "How do you honor those you love?" asked another. Daniel tried to answer carefully, keeping his words simple. He spoke about Earth traditions, about families gathering for meals, about laughter, shared with friends, about giving small gifts to show care. Each time he finished, the officials would nod thoughtfully, as if recording his words as sacred teachings. He wanted to shout that he was just explaining ordinary human life, not philosophy, but the way they looked at him with reverence and curiosity made it impossible. Later, back in his quarters, he slumped into his chair, exhausted. The nurse entered quietly, carrying another tray of calming tea. She set it down and sat across from him. "You carry yourself well," she said. Daniel groaned. "I feel like I'm living in a play where everyone thinks I'm the lead actor, but I never agreed to the role. They ask me questions, they bow, they treat me like I'm more than I am." The nurse tilted her head. "Do you not see yourself as more?" He laughed bitterly. "I see myself as exactly what I am, a technician who got here by accident. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. I just made a joke." She studied him carefully. "Your people must be strange indeed if words of jest can carry such power." Daniel leaned forward. "That's the thing. On Earth we use jokes to make life lighter, to handle pressure, to survive hard days. A joke doesn't always mean what it sounds like. It's like turning heavy stones into feathers just for a moment." The nurse's eyes softened. "Perhaps that is your gift, to turn weight into lightness, to make what is heavy easier to carry." Her words lingered in his mind long after she left. He had never thought of jokes that way, but maybe she was right. Maybe humans did have something different to offer. Still, the pressure of his new role grew heavier. Everywhere he went, aliens watched him. Some admired him, others whispered doubts. He overheard one group in the corridor saying, "He is small, fragile. How can he stand beside her?" Another replied, "Perhaps that is his strength, to be small yet chosen." Daniel quickened his pace, pretending not to hear. But inside he felt torn. He wanted to correct them, to tell them the truth, yet a part of him feared what would happen if he did. What if admitting it was all a mistake insulted their queen? What if it caused more harm than good? One night, restless and unable to sleep, Daniel wandered the quiet halls of the ship. He found himself back near the queen's chamber. The nurse was there, watching over her. She glanced up as he entered. "You cannot sleep," she said softly. Daniel shook his head. Too many thoughts. He stepped closer to the queen, watching her breathe. For a long time he said nothing. Then he whispered, "Why me? Of all the people here." "Why me?" the nurse answered, though her gaze remained on the queen. "Because sometimes the universe chooses not the strongest, but the one who sees differently, and you, Daniel, see differently." Daniel closed his eyes, feeling the weight of those words. He had never asked for this. He had never wanted it. Yet here he was, caught in a bond he did not understand, surrounded by expectations he could not escape. And deep inside, a quiet voice whispered a question he did not dare to answer yet. What if this misunderstanding was not an accident at all, but the start of something he was meant to face?